Yuji vs. Choso is one of the standout fights from JJK Season 2, and among the few major one-on-one fights Yuji has throughout the entire series. Yuji of course lost this fight, but went on to get considerably stronger throughout the Shibuya incident. Now, with JJK Season 3 having just premiered, where Yuji and Choso both had fights that took place simultaneously, and them now fighting as allies, it seems natural to ask the question, how would a rematch between the two look, and would the outcome be any different? In this video, I am going to be answering that exact question. To be specific, I am comparing the Yuji that fought Yuta and the Choso that fought Naoya, and seeing who would win if they fought each other instead. I will mostly be referencing and showing the manga throughout this video, but that is mainly because I don't want to be hit with copyright, and it's just easier to show certain things using still manga pages. For any anime viewers of the series, just know that the anime is incredibly faithful to the manga, so almost everything I say here will hold true in the anime. This is still a proper breakdown of Yuji vs. Choso at the start of Season 3. Obviously there isn't a good story reason why this would happen, but this is just a fun hypothetical matchup, so don't think too hard about why these two would suddenly fight to the death. With that said, I will just assume they are both fighting fully serious, and they keep all knowledge they already have, which importantly means whatever they learned about each other from their first fight. Also, Yuji is still injured at the start of Season 3, but we never actually get to see a fully healed Yuji at this time in the series. We only see a healthy Yuji later on in the manga where he has gotten stronger. So I'll mainly just be comparing Yuji and Choso in the states that they are in at the start of Season 3. But I will talk some about if Yuji hypothetically fully recovered and what that may mean. Now, before I begin, I would appreciate it if you liked the video and subscribed. With JJK Season 3 airing, I have plenty more JJK videos planned similar to this one. When comparing Choso and Yuji at this point in the series, something that is commonly brought up is Choso's statement describing Yuji's growth. Some claimed this means Yuji is over Choso and Choso just admits inferiority to Yuji. However, the statement just doesn't say this. First off, the statement is purely in reference to how hard Yuji hits and not his overall combative skill. Right before this, Choso sees Yuji punch a curse, then comments on his power and physical strength. There isn't any issue with Yuji hitting harder than Choso, as Yuji's punching power is a standout trait. However, the statement doesn't say Yuji is over Choso at all. Choso is simply praising Yuji's strength and growth since they fought. Praising someone for being strong does not mean that they are stronger than you. Unless you think Jogo is stronger than Sukuna, this should be easy to understand. Obviously this is a very extreme example, but it should get the point across. Now, the other point would be Choso is glazing Yuji's growth since their original fight, so a clear comparison would be Yuji has massively grown since their first fight in Shibuya, and in the first fight, Choso was pushed to the absolute limit. Thus, Yuji would now surpass Choso. I take two main issues with this line of reasoning. That being that the first fight showed Choso to pretty clearly be superior to Yuji, and that Choso likely grew stronger after Shibuya. First, to address the actual fight and how Yuji and Choso compared during it, there's just no way to frame this fight that does not show Choso is superior. Choso was the actual winner of the fight, obviously. Now, while it was extremely close, with Choso taking heavy damage and needing to off-guard Yuji twice, the fight would have never gotten to this point if Yuji didn't receive help. Yuji only managed to drag the fight into close quarters by nullifying Choso's blood convergence, and the plan to accomplish this was made by Mekamaru, not Yuji. Before Mekamaru began giving Yuji intel, Yuji was just being overwhelmed by piercing blood. Mekamaru makes it clear to Yuji that Choso has no weaknesses when his blood manipulation is fully operational, and that Yuji will die if he cannot stop Choso's convergence. Even if this wasn't directly said, Yuji was having almost no success against Choso up to this point, and takes the gamble of cornering himself in the bathroom, which if it didn't work would have certainly led to Yuji's death. Yuji may not be the absolute brightest, but attempting a plan that Mekamaru says has a 90% chance of resulting in death if you aren't in a desperate situation would be absolutely ridiculous even for Yuji. So without Mekamaru's help, Yuji would have undoubtedly lost this fight and it would not have been as close as it was. Now, once Yuji did actually force Choso into close quarters, the fight did become incredibly close, and Yuji even overwhelmed Choso initially, but there is some context to this. Yuji is so naturally proficient in hand-to-hand that in chapter 12 of the manga, Gojo says Yuji is already better than most in close quarters. Mind you, this is before Yuji has undergone any notable training, and Yuji obviously goes on to train and have many tough fights that he grows throughout. Todo even notes Yuji's ability to grow in hand-to-hand skill during their fight. So when Yuji fights Choso, his skill is absolutely insane in hand-to-hand. On the other hand, Choso is just stated to be an inexperienced fighter, and his preferred fighting style is more ranged combat, almost always opting to sit back and spam piercing blood. So Choso was taking on Yuji in Yuji's absolute best area without being very proficient in it himself. The other thing that Choso was struggling with was the power differential, with Choso noting only 3 hits from Yuji inflicted severe damage. However, once Choso determined that he needed to use his blood hardening to deal with Yuji's power, he was just straight up a match for Yuji and went on to win the fight. Now, I know Yuji effectively had one arm for the majority of this fight, but that was because of an injury caused by Choso. To be fair, this same injury being inflicted in a rematch where Yuji knows not to block piercing blood with his arms is very unlikely. But the point here was to say the first fight they had in no way showed Yuji as superior. I will get into specifics shortly, but a rematch where both Yuji and Choso have intel will benefit both of them in different ways. So using this first fight in general is not a strong point of comparison, and Yuji getting stronger since then does not mean he can beat Choso. Now, the other issue I have with the argument of Yuji having a close fight with Choso and then growing stronger, meaning he surpassed Choso, is Choso himself likely grew stronger. As I said earlier, Choso is an inexperienced fighter, and against Yuji he had a fight that pushed him to the limits. We know from Todo's explanation that you can grow through fighting, which makes sense as sparring is a form of training both in series and in real life, and a fight is just an even more intense version of this. So someone who is inexperienced and thus has lots of room to grow, getting pushed like this would absolutely grow stronger. Now, this next point I do not think is definitive and depends on your interpretation of some things, but is worth mentioning regardless. Another way Choso could have grown stronger is from the suffering he experienced during Shibuya. Mai says that suffering makes sorcerers stronger when explaining to Maki that you must give something up in order to receive something else. Where this comes down to interpretation is if you think stronger here is in reference to physically or mentally. I can honestly see either being valid. Experiencing and overcoming hardships does make people more mentally resilient, so I understand how this could very well be talking about becoming stronger mentally. However, on the other hand, cursed energy is based on negative emotions, and experiencing suffering would lead to negative emotions. On top of this, Mai is explaining to Maki what she needs to do in order to become stronger as a sorcerer. So this statement meaning stronger in a combative sense would make contextual sense. If you do agree with this interpretation, then it gives another reason that Choso has grown since the Yuji fight, as he had a mental breakdown and identity crisis right after beating Yuji. Like I said, this is less definitive, but I think it is interesting and worth mentioning regardless. Now, aside from the explanations of how Choso would have grown, we can also just observe that Choso has grown, as Choso is shown being far faster than Yuji based on how they respectively performed against Naoya. When Yuji and Choso fought, they were very comparable in terms of speed, and Yuji grew considerably between fighting Choso and his encounter with Naoya. So for Choso to be faster than this Yuji, he would need to have improved. Now, to actually explain why Choso is faster, against Naoya, Choso is able to somewhat keep up with and track Naoya once activating Flowing Red Scale. I have seen some people have the misconception that Choso only augments his vision to begin tracking Naoya, and this is not also displaying Choso's actual physical speed. This just isn't the case, however, as Flowing Red Scale also increases your body's speed and strength. Megami says that Kamo's Flowing Red Scale made both his speed and power several levels greater, and Choso's would likely be an even greater increase than Kamo, considering he is using Flowing Red Scale stack. Choso also didn't just perceive Naoya moving, he actually turned his body and threw an attack at Naoya while he was in motion, with Naoya even saying he has adjusted to his speed. Naoya does dodge this attack from Choso and land one of his own, but he attributes this to always acting under the assumption that his opponent will counter, and not that he is faster than Choso. That being said, I do not have an issue with Naoya being faster than Choso to some degree, but the important point is just that Choso is able to keep up with this level of speed at all, as Yuji cannot do the same. Before engaging with Choso one-on-one, Naoya blitzes Yuji horribly. Yuji is shown unable to track Naoya at all on 2 separate occasions. In one of these instances, Naoya runs up to and circles to Yuji's side before he can respond. When he tried a similar thing against Choso, Choso's able to track the movement and throw an attack at Naoya. This is without even mentioning the fact that Naoya was a further distance from Yuji than he was from Choso, and thus Naoya had to cover a greater distance before reaching Yuji, giving Yuji more time to respond than Choso had. And despite this, Yuji still performed worse. One thing I have heard people say about this version of Yuji is that he kept up with Yuta, so he was just not going all out on Naoya, as Yuta is far superior to Naoya. I'm not even going to explain why Yuta should be above Naoya, because Yuji just didn't fight a full power Yuta. I'm not going to go too in depth on this because I covered this at length in my Yuta video, but to briefly explain, Yuta doesn't use most of his arsenal during his fight with Yuji, and doesn't even partially manifest Rika until the very end. While this doesn't mean Yuta cannot be using his max physical capabilities, it would just show he doesn't have the intention to use his max overall capabilities on Yuji. So it's questionable what reason Yuta would even have to use his max physical abilities. Yuji also believes Yuta could kill Sukuna if he ever turns again, and while I do not think Yuta could actually do this, Yuji believing Yuta could beat somebody far, far stronger than him based on the fight they had would make no sense if Yuji is actually at all comparable to Yuta. Everything we see just points to Yuta holding back on Yuji, so based on the Naoya feats, Choso is still far faster than Yuji here. While the speed would give Choso a massive advantage in any close quarters exchange, he does still have to worry about Yuji's immense power, which Yuji is likely superior in. There isn't a direct comparison to draw at this point, but Choso's punching power is never really glazed like Yuji's is, and Choso himself hypes up how hard Yuji can hit. Similar to the first fight they had, Choso would probably take heavy damage from every clean shot Yuji lands. Now, a notable difference in this fight would be Choso's willingness to use blood hardening. In the original fight, Choso only decided on using blood hardening once he realized how much of a threat Yuji's power was. In this fight, he would already know about Yuji's immense power, so he would just use the blood hardening as soon as he's in any hand-to-hand exchange with Yuji. So the blood hardening will allow Choso to alleviate a power gap somewhat. Another application of blood hardening that would help Choso is using it to block punches. We see Choso do this to Yuji when Yuji attempts to surprise him by attacking with his injured arm, and Choso simply hardens some blood over the area Yuji punches and is able to take the attack with seemingly no damage. So while Yuji is more powerful than Choso, Choso has ways to deal with this difference, and this coupled with far superior speed would make Yuji hitting harder not that helpful. After all, your punching power only matters if you can land the punch in the first place, which considering the speed difference is unlikely to even happen. Now with any matchup involving Yuji, Black Flash has to be talked about. Using Black Flash obviously makes Yuji hit way harder, with the exact multiplier differing between the anime and the manga, but regardless which numerical value you go with, we see from feats the difference it makes. Now, the thing that makes Black Flash hard to discuss is it does seem its power can vary. For example, Yuji went from not being able to do a single bit of damage to Mahito to one-shotting Mahito by using Black Flash. Whereas against Hanami, Yuji could somewhat damage Hanami with his normal punches by Hanami's own admission, and Hanami takes 4 consecutive Black Flashes without being put down, and then went on to take more damage after. This can be explained by Yuji saying he wants to hit Mahito with a Black Flash imbued with max cursed energy, so he probably just put way more cursed energy into the one he used against Mahito, and it resulted in a stronger hit. This still does mean it's hard to know exactly how strong a Black Flash Yuji would land on Choso if he ever did. If it's like the one he used on Mahito, it would certainly just kill Choso. Yuji says Mahito was tougher than Choso even with his blood hardening, and the Black Flash was enough to one-shot Mahito. If the Black Flash is more similar to the ones used on Hanami, I don't think it would just immediately end the fight. We actually have an example of Choso being hit by a Black Flash later in the manga. During Shinjuku, Sukuna lands a Black Flash on Choso, and Choso manages to survive the hit by using blood hardening. Now, Choso is stronger here, but the example is still relevant because Sukuna was much stronger than Choso at this point, and he was still able to survive the Black Flash. Choso was pretty messed up by it, but not only is the gap between Sukuna and Choso likely larger than the gap between Yuji and Choso, I also am not arguing Choso would tank Yuji's Black Flash, just that it wouldn't immediately end him. Now, I just rambled a lot about how well Choso would take a Black Flash, but this is assuming it ever even lands. While Yuji is the best user of Black Flash ever, it still isn't something he can use at will, so it's not a certainty he lands one. On top of this, Black Flash even activating requires you to land a punch, which Yuji will struggle with against Choso due to the speed gap. All this to say, if Yuji lands a Black Flash, it could certainly result in a win, or at the very least turning things in his favor, but it is just unlikely he will. This is especially unlikely considering Yuji needs to be in close range to even attempt Black Flash, and Choso has many ranged options to make getting in close range difficult. Yes, Yuji will have the intel now of how he could disable Choso's convergence, but Yuji has no realistic way to actually pull this off. In their first fight, there were several things that allowed Yuji to force Choso into the bathroom that are not present in the rematch. First off, just having a location like a bathroom where you can easily cause water to be sprayed across the entire room for an extended period. Mechamaru had to tell Yuji about this location in the original fight, and there may just not be a similar location for Yuji to use. But even if there is, Yuji didn't force Choso into the bathroom, he baited Choso to follow him. Initially, Choso realized Yuji was clearly planning something and chose not to follow, but Yuji insulting his dead brothers enraged Choso enough that he followed Yuji anyways. Not only would the same insult no longer work, as Choso has forgiven Yuji and considers him his brother now, but Choso is typically a very calm person and a fairly intelligent fighter, so he would not fall for this obvious bait a second time. On top of all this, Choso didn't know water would dispel convergence before it happened, so now that he does know this, he would be even more cautious to never be put in a situation where he can be sprayed by water. There is just no way Yuji would be able to replicate what he did in the first fight in order to stop convergence, so he would need to deal with all of Choso's attacks in a more direct manner if he hopes to get close. Piercing Blood is the most obvious issue for Yuji here. Yuji was able to somewhat react to Piercing Blood in their original fight, and he has only gotten faster since then, on top of now knowing what the technique is, so it may seem like Yuji could just easily avoid Piercing Blood. But there are two major issues with that. First of all, Yuji was never even able to fully avoid Piercing Blood. Yuji himself admits it's a 50-50 chance that he is able to dodge it, and every time Yuji dodges Piercing Blood, he is still getting partially hit by it. He is just avoiding damage beyond scratches. Yuji also only manages this when Piercing Blood is fired from a pretty large distance, which gives him more time to react. We see Choso can fire off Piercing Blood at a much closer range, both against Yuji and against Naoya. Yuji literally only survives this close range Piercing Blood because Choso was impatient and didn't condense it enough. Not only was Yuji never able to properly deal with Piercing Blood's speed, but Choso getting stronger should also make Piercing Blood faster. Part of Piercing Blood is you compress convergence between your hands, and Kamo, someone who also uses Piercing Blood, comments on how powerful Choso is right after he compresses his hands to prepare Piercing Blood. So the power of Piercing Blood can clearly be affected by the power of the user, meaning a stronger Choso should be able to fire off a faster Piercing Blood. Yuji being able to react to Piercing Blood from a weaker Choso would not mean he can react to Piercing Blood in this fight. There is a chance this fight just ends by Yuji getting hit in the head by a Piercing Blood, which he admits would be fatal. But let's say Yuji is able to deal with Piercing Blood through his speed. Conveniently, we have a fight where Choso is fighting someone too fast for Piercing Blood and faster than Yuji, which of course is Naoya. What Choso did in this fight is both harden blood on Naoya's clothes to slow him down, and fake Naoya out by making it look like he was going to use Piercing Blood and then fired off a supernova instead. The second part obviously wouldn't work well on Yuji, as Yuji knows about supernova and Naoya did not. The first part, however, is a totally valid strategy. Choso managed to put blood on Naoya and harden it by just making contact once. It wasn't even a hit he landed, it was from a blocked kick. Replicating this against Yuji when Choso has a speed advantage should be no issue, but this would of course require Choso to engage in close range, which isn't his preferred style. What he would likely opt for is just the blood wave he used on Naoya. Considering Naoya is much faster than Yuji, I doubt Yuji could avoid this attack fully. While Naoya did avoid the attack, he never gained ground when running from it. He explicitly says he cannot let any blood touch him, so if he was capable of creating more distance from the blood, he certainly would have. The fact he didn't do this would imply the wave isn't way slower than Naoya. So if Naoya has trouble avoiding it, Yuji would definitely not be able to. Even if it somehow fails, Choso can still just put blood on Yuji in close range, and use the wave as a distraction to help him with this like against Naoya. Once Choso has hardened blood on Yuji, he can slow down its movements. From here, Choso could attempt piercing blood again, or just beat Yuji in close range. Choso is already faster normally, so a Yuji nerfed in speed would have no hope here, especially considering Choso would be able to use blood manipulation weapons to help deal damage to Yuji. So not only is it questionable if Yuji can even get into close quarters before being taken out by a piercing blood, but he also likely loses a close quarters fight. The only way I could see Yuji winning is if he somehow disables convergence or lands a black flash. Those scenarios are both unlikely and aren't even guaranteed wins. The only other thing I feel worth mentioning is that if you think Choso being above Yuji at this point is absurd, you could just say he is only losing to Choso due to not being recovered. Choso does just straight up say Yuji has yet to fully recover, and Yuji is also mentally restraining himself, so he is not at full power. If you really believe Yuji has to be stronger than Choso, he could just be stronger at full power, but loses to Choso due to being nerfed. Now, to be clear on my position, I think it isn't made clear the exact amount to which Yuji is weakened, so it's unfair to say he would just make up the gap with Choso if he was at top power. He certainly could be stronger than Choso at his peak, but we just don't know. There is also the fact that Choso even being at top power against Naoya is questionable. To explain, what Yuji is still recovering from is the damage he sustained fighting Mahito and then Kenjaku. Choso is also stated to be weakened when he encounters Kenjaku, which makes sense as the fight with Yuji clearly took a toll on him. So both Yuji and Choso are recovering from a weakened state and had the same amount of time to try and recover. Yuji was definitely way more damaged than Choso was, but Yuji also has superior recovery ability due to Sukuna being inside of him, which Yuji says is the reason he is mostly recovered so quickly. So even though Choso wasn't as badly hurt as Yuji, he doesn't have as great of a recovery speed, meaning he is also potentially weakened when fighting Naoya. Now I admit this isn't definitive and nothing about this is confirmed, but similarly Yuji being massively stronger to the point of being able to beat Choso when at top power is also never confirmed by any means. But like I said at the start of the video, this is meant to compare the Yuji and Choso we see fight at the start of Season 3, and we never even see a top power Yuji fight at this point in the series. So trying to compare him to anyone is pretty pointless. Without any crazy speculation about Yuji's strength, Choso should win quite definitively.